Learn that trick from Vietnam. What was I just going to say that I was going to start with? This is weird.
How you hung your own shelves.
Oh, yeah, and they fell because we have shelves in the office with books on them.
You can see them in your frame.
I have hung my TV and books on my wall, shelves and my TV.
Did the
in
TV
the last
fall?
3 apartments. And out of those 6 times that I've hung heavy things on the wall, one of them fell. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's not bad.
I was surprised that my TV never fell. I think I found a stud, but I think I used just strong wall anchors for my bookshelves. And then in the middle of the night, it was insane, man. I had this glass, like light booth little ornament thing, and like these porcelain owls from like Korea that I got from when I visited my sister there. In the middle of the night, like dead, like it was like 2:30 in the morning. These long shelves fell in my when I was in Brooklyn, and just it was horrendous. It was horrifying. I woke up.
Did you think it was like an earthquake?
I thought it was someone busting in my apartment, and then I realized what happened. But my heart was racing because I was just dead sleep, and then I was like, oh, and then I heard people in the hallway like opening their doors, and they're like, what the was that?
You should open your door and be like, who's making all this noise?
Exactly. I was gonna go out and say everything's all right, but I kind of was just frozen because I was so startled, and I just literally kind of just hid and ashamed in my apartment. And they were like, "What just happened?" There's only 1 or 2 people who came out, and then I was just like, "Well, they're gonna go back to bed." It sounded insane, though. I mean, it sounded insane.
Did it rip out like the drywall?
Just a little bit. I mean, really, it was just the things fell and everything fell off of it, and there was like heavy books and some things that made loud breaking sounds.
I have one more question. Did you clean it up when it fell, or did you go back to bed?
That's a good question. I don't know if I remember.
I would have 100% gone back to bed.
I think I made sure that everything was okay. Also, these shelves were right over the TV, which was also mounted in the wall. Because, again, Brooklyn studio, you don't have room for like an entertainment center.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Anyways, it worked out.
Nice.
So what you been working on?
Let's see. I've been doing a few different things. I've been doing some Ember work with building like on EmberMap.com, switching us over to username and password based logged in.
Nice.
So when we started, we kind of copied Medium's flow, which was, magic email link. I think Slack had done something similar, and we really liked that. But now the sort of password managers are kind of ubiquitous. They're really good. They work great on mobile devices.
It's crazy how far it's come in the last like 2 years, because EmberMap's only been around for 2 years.
Yeah.
But like back then it was no brainer. It was like, wow, passwords suck.
Yep.
And, yeah, Medium does this awesome thing where you never need a password. It's the best thing ever.
Yeah. So building that was great, but now it's a pain in the ass because you want to log in on your phone, and it's like, got to enter your email address, got to go to your email client, got to click a link. It's just versus like just clicking that iOS
beautiful blue button,
fill password button.
Yeah.
So getting that set up, which has been a lot of work on the UI side. It's interesting. We're kind of running into a spot where we have these UI components like buttons and forms and all this, but when it comes to implementing something like a login form, this is like a form that pops up in a modal. We don't really have that anywhere. We do in some places, but we don't have like
abstraction broke down.
Yeah. So
how did it break down?
Well, the margins look a little off when they're inside the modal. So I want to go like customize it, and I open up the UI components, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll add some new variant to the button. And as I did this, I was like, wow, there's a lot of button variants here.
Yeah.
I counted them. We have 30 variants.
Really?
For our button. Yeah. Now some of these things, some of the variants are just like uppercase.
Right.
And it takes whatever text you put in the button and just ensures that it gets uppercase.
Right.
So those sort of things compose well. But then we have these other variants that are like brand, and they make the color of the button right, the borders right, the spacing right. They do a whole bunch of things. Yeah, I'm in a spot where
Doesn't decompose at all.
Doesn't decompose, but I'm building like a new. So there's a few things here. One is like I'm building a new UI, like a login form in a modal that we don't really have, and so I need to customize some stuff, whether it's in like the form or the button. And the way I do that is by adding new variants to our components. But once I've gotten to that point, it's almost like, man, it would be easier to use Tailwind here.
Yeah.
To just use Tailwind and not even have to like, because I'm changing levels of abstraction.
Right.
So there's like this context switch, and it's like, it's frustrating because it's like I just want to kind of, I'm not using our UI components. I'm not using a style that already exists. I just want to create a new style, and I want like a fast way to tweak it and create it. And yeah, it's just hard to do new UI stuff.
So why not just do Tailwind?
Yeah, I think that's sort of where,
when you're building something new.
When I'm building something like this, I'm starting to do that more in the Tailwind. One thing I noticed though is that, so there's like a bunch of like threads that come out of this. One of them is, we don't really have 30 variants on our button. I mean, we do in the code. There's like 30 different variants. But if you think about it, like a lot of those variants are contextual. Like we have a danger button, which is like a red button that's uppercase text that's like you're about to delete something, and it pops up inside a confirm modal and says like, are you sure? And it's like this nice red button. It's great. It communicates exactly what's going on.
Easy to use.
But it's not like a button variant. It's like a contextual button variant, because you would never see that button on its own page. That button only exists for like a danger confirmation window. So the fact that like
it's a global variant.
Yeah, the fact that it's a global variant, and then when I'm like adding a new variant, I'm kind of looking at all the other variants and thinking like, oh, could this affect this thing?
But you shouldn't be thinking about that at all.
At all. And then also too, there's like this risk now that like I add a new variant and there's a chance that I break the danger button for whatever reason. Like I add a new variant that does something with borders, and
how would that break the danger button?
I add a variant.
Does the danger button use other
like,
variants?
Yeah, there's like buttons with like borders and like transparent borders and not. And so if I like start tweaking those, and this is like one of the things.
You're saying if someone were to use your new variant with a danger variant as well?
No, it's just I go in and I'm like editing the UI button.
Yeah.
And I'm just changing variants in there.
Right.
And there's a chance that it breaks.
Right.
Now I have to be like, now I have to know that this button that I'm editing is rendered on a whole bunch of other pages. So I'm adding a style to UI button, and you could say,
for
like,
example,
it's isolated. Like it's the style the variant I'm adding is isolated, but I'm like changing a global button that's used.
Yeah.
And
you're editing a component. Yeah.
This is one of the things that happen. We have a button that like it appends itself to a text area. So you have like not text area, text input. So imagine like on one horizontal line, you have like a text input and then a button attached to that. So they all look like kind of like one element. I had to like change that because of something that was like setting a height on itself. There's something like it was setting a height on itself, and I had to change that, and that broke a button on another page. So this is sort of what I'm talking about, where
you're dealing with globals.
Yeah,
in a sense, to the project.
But then I don't want to, like when I'm building the login form, I don't want to be thinking about this.
You don't want to start from scratch.
No. I don't want to be thinking like,
worrying about other pages.
And then I was thinking like, well, could we use like a tool like Percy that just Percy would catch this sort of stuff, right? Because it would take screenshots of everything and let us know when they change. But that's addressing the symptom,
exactly,
not the problem.
Yeah.
So that's
and the root thing here. Also, you shouldn't have to really think about that.
Yeah. So I think these two things. One is like there are a lot of variants for buttons, but they're mostly contextual. So the actual set of buttons that I have available to me is not 30.
Right.
Even though the API allows for 30.
Right.
The other thing is
API allows for a lot more than 30, right?
It allows
factorial or whatever.
Combinations.
Yeah.
But if I change a variant and that variant has like a border, that like a border width of 2 and I remove it, then I kind of have to think about like, okay, where is this used? How does this change with the other things? Yeah. So the fact that they're contextual, they're global.
I'd have to code with you to see how the one variant can affect the other.
Okay.
Because I'm not 100% following, but I think it's bad enough that you're even looking at it. Like you said, if the style, you want a new button and you have to add it to a global spot and you're just making it for a one-off place or something like that.
So that's the other thing. If you were to look at we have like buttons everywhere in our website, but if you were to like look at a button, like the button on our email course page, this isn't like a global button. This button was made for the email course page.
This is where the tension comes in, though, because there is right now, a lot of the site is inconsistent.
Yeah. Yes. But I don't. So this is, I don't think if you have an inconsistent site, I don't think your programming APIs are going to get you that consistency. I think that needs to happen more upstream, because the thing here is the variants enforce consistency, because I have a set of variants that I can choose from. But
not if you're building new pages that aren't composed of those things.
But not only that, like I just open up the component file and I add a new variant.
Yeah.
So it's not
actually enforced.
It's not enforcing me, and I need it's not like, oh, I'm just going to go off and do my own thing. It's like I need a new style. I have a button in a modal. I have
a few thoughts here. First is like, you could imagine if you're working on an app that's the state of ours, which is it's inconsistent, and you're working on a design that is what you want because it's a newly designed thing, but it doesn't, the existing UI components don't accommodate it, then you just say that this is a non-UI component part of the site. And so you just are doing raw HTML and Tailwind. That's one approach.
Yep. And that's
just say we're not part of UI components here. Maybe eventually we can extract something from here. We'll see something on 3 pages that aren't able to be built with a design system. They're built with raw stuff, and eventually we can maybe extract it back into the design system. But right now it's not. So we're not going to try to shoehorn the design components in.
Yep. There's another thing where, just to kind of argue the other side, when there's not a lot of variance, the UI components are amazing. So UI modal, there's like 2 ways to render a modal.
Right, and you wouldn't want to do that from scratch.
Yeah, I don't want to make a new modal from scratch. So UI modal is great. There's like a small modal, and there's a big modal, and that's it. Those are like the two variants that I get.
Right,
and the default one is small, and it has all the responsive stuff built into it.
What about the form stuff?
The form stuff is good. So
is the behavior stuff good and
yes,
the styling stuff bad?
Exactly.
So that's.
But the styling stuff is easy to change inside the form. So I had to do that for this login form. I had to change some of the styling stuff. And the first thing the variants. The first thing I did, I started prop drilling. Like I had a form that was like automatically styling itself, and I needed like the margins were messy, and so I was like prop drilling a margin all the way down just to get on a label.
Right.
And you look at this, you're like, okay, I can't commit this code. This is a mess. but you can. The form stuff, you can like peel back those abstractions, similar to what we do in the form series. And so there's like the escape hatch there. There's not a lot of variance, so I don't have to worry about. Yeah, I don't have to worry about composing a bunch of variants to get my button to look right. And then if I tweak one of those, thinking about how that one variant that was composed with all my variants worked for my use case, but did that one variant that was composed with other variants in other parts of the site break those other parts of the site?
Right.
So I don't have to worry about that when there's not a lot of variance. And form is a case where there's not a lot.
Right. So it's not basically the button is the worst case of this.
Yeah, I think the button is the worst case because of the variance. I think the variants are the why I feel this pain.
Right. There's a chance if we went through and refactored the site down to a set of actually consistent buttons, there would be many fewer variants. Also, like the margins shouldn't be in there. We know that now, but we didn't know that when we started.
Sure. Yeah.
Another thought I had. What were you gonna say?
Just that
You're not sure.
Well, just things like modals.
Yeah.
I don't want to build those from scratch.
Right.
And I feel like our modal, the behavior and the styling in our modal component is really good.
Right. Interesting. Lots of thoughts in my head right now. Trying to think what my first one was going to be. I think the first point I want to say is, if we go back to like 2 or 3 years ago, the way we were styling things, tachyons was not easily customizable.
Yes.
So one of the first things we reached for was a way to have like customized UI components, which is part of what drove this. I wonder what it would look like to undo all the UI components and go to Tailwind, because at some level, the Tailwind scales offer the same constraints and flexibility that we are trying to get at with the UI components.
Yes.
So you could imagine.
Yes. Tailwind itself, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Tailwind itself has a great set of constraints.
Yeah.
In there.
Yeah. Whereas tachyons was too constrained, and so you had to go outside of it a lot. Or if you did customize, it was painful. So we had to always, it was tachyons plus X. It wasn't just a tachyon site. Whereas we could actually just make a Tailwind site. Yep. It would be interesting to think what that would look like to just go all the way back, undo all the UI components in the whole site, and then be really diligent about keeping the customized values of all the Tailwind scales minimal, and only in that way. Like basically, we're talking about you're in a situation where you're building a new page, and you as a developer need an escape hatch, right? That's what we're talking about. So it would be interesting if like Tailwind was the primary API and the escape hatch was that. Like you need a new thing, you can just do it in Tailwind.
Yeah. The other thought I had, again, if I could snap my fingers, zero cost, was like, it'd be cool if I could build all this stuff in a design tool.
That was exactly the other thing I was thinking.
And then when I got to Ember, I wasn't trying to figure out. I wasn't trying to figure out the constraints. I wasn't trying to figure out.
Because the hard part is you're doing about two things.
Yes.
And you want to just be doing one thing. And if you've ever added a feature without having to basically do anything new on the design or styling side, it's like
unbelievable.
Bliss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of there are features that we have added like that.
Yes.
And that's like, wow, these UI components are great.
Right.
And
so there's an argument.
I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. It's not about getting rid of UI components. It's
You could imagine it though, just because it's kind of like, what did we say in your last forms video that we just published today? It's like the preferred duplication to the wrong abstraction. And it's like, now something's taking twice as long as it should, or 3 times as long as it should.
Right.
If you were to just use Tailwind or something like that, something lower level.
Super fast, yep.
The other side from undoing everything and going all Tailwind is to say, you do the design up front. And basically we have like UI components in our sketch tool or whatever. And that's your constraints.
Mm-hmm.
And if you decide a new design needs something that's not part of UI components, then you figure out what that new UI component is, you add it, and you like ideally document it in the style guide or show how it's going to be used. And then when you go to build the feature, the thing is there. That's kind of like maybe wishful thinking.
That feels like it's too isolated. It feels like you're building a button outside of the context where that button is going to be used.
Well, if the button belongs as part of the design system, it's because it's part of the design system. If it's not, then it's fine for it to be one-off. I mean, we have one-off things all over the site that exist outside of the design system.
Yes.
So not everything is in the design system.
But that's a tricky thing. We have one-off things that exist all over our site. They're not part of the design system, but oftentimes they have some behavior that's similar to some other component. Like we want it to behave like a button. So we like shoehorn it into the design system. I think that's a trap. That's like a trap we can fall into. It's basically me saying I need a new button. Okay, I'm just going to open button and add a new variant. It's like probably not something I should be doing.
Well, it's also like, why do you want to use UI button? Maybe because it has loading state and disabled state.
Yeah. Well, one great thing about UI button is
the loading spinner.
We know it can be context aware. So if it's inside a form, it does a submit thing. If you want to make it use a ref to, it becomes a link to.
But maybe the problem there is that we're coupling behavior and styling.
Yes, 100%.
Same thing with the forms. Like the forms in your series are unopinionated about the styling. So you could literally reuse them in any app.
Yep.
So maybe the answer is that, which
Yes.
is to have presenters and containers or
And
whatever.
I was thinking about that, and I was like, okay, so then we fall back to like, do we just fall back to having components that take a class attribute with a bunch of Tailwind stuff on
Or
it?
it just yields what it needs and doesn't render anything. You could imagine.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head of an API, but like you could imagine UI button as button, and then you can either render a button tag or an A link. You can do like button dot, if button dot is like you pass a task to the UI button. So it's just data. And then if button dot is disabled, you add like a disabled class, or you can completely cut. But then it's like, you would still end up with wanting higher level. That's the thing.
Yes. Yeah, it's hard. It's not,
I don't know the answers. The problem, what I'm frustrated by right now is the fact that I haven't carved out time to go back and get rid of the tachyons, that get a nice set of Tailwind defaults, look at all the UI buttons, pull the margins out. We put margins on our style components, which for the record is a bad idea and you shouldn't do, because you got to define. When you're talking about building a design system, you have to say who owns what, where's the responsibility, and you look at a UI and you break it down and you want to say like, yeah, is this a panel or is this a panel with the padding? So it's nice to just say, yeah, it's just no margin, because that way you can the caller can have more control about laying things out.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think if we remove the margins and we clean up some of that stuff, we could clean up the UI components a lot. But I still think there's some interesting questions. I think maybe with new stuff like the email course or the login or whatever, where it's like we haven't really thought through it and we don't really know, then like just raw Tailwind.
That's sort of what I'm thinking too.
It's like if the UI component doesn't work at all, you just back out of it completely. But it's like, yeah, and then we'll just see what happens there, because it'll be the other problems. You know?
Yeah,
it'll be the other problems.
I know.
And then maybe there'll be a better way to share them or something like that.
It also too, once you have a few instances of the same class of problem, the refactoring becomes easier.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You have the use cases in front of you. By the way, I think there's something about this that's important. This is like a, are you okay, by the way?
My leg fell asleep, and I am having the worst pins and needles right now. So just continue.
Okay, good. I thought we were gonna have to edit that out, but I kind of like it. Your face was changing.
Yeah, it is.
I was like, do you need to take a break or something? I think this is there's this thing, right? Engineering. Let's talk about making a nested drop-down list and how to use recursion and curried actions to make this data structure work. Okay, that's like definitely engineering. Then you have like the Steve Sugar, Adam Wathan stuff, which is like design. You're like looking at a table and you're like, it's not gonna work on mobile, whatever. Add a shadow, remove borders, it'll look better.
Yep.
There's this thing in between. And if you notice it, like most of the tutorials around, like whether you're looking at an Ember tutorial or React tutorial or whatever, they either just completely wave away the problem of design, of implementing a design, or they start off with a well-designed like CSS style sheet.
Yep.
But implementing design is hard.
Yeah.
It's super hard. I was just thinking about this because I was working on, when we were working on the email course, there was a lot of questions. There's a lot of ways you can do it. If you give me a Steve Sugar designed sketch file and then I go to implement it, there's a ton of ways I can do it. Like one of the things I was thinking about is I've started doing this thing where I like only use margin top and just never use margin bottom.
So this way, when like you add a new section, you just know I'm dropping this thing in here, and all the lever I tweak is a top margin.
Yeah, exactly. And it's fewer surprises. The margin clap stuff doesn't own you, where you have like, if this section has margin bottom 20 and this is margin top 30, there's only like 30 margin between them because of margin claps. It's just way simpler. Like you need to move something, you tweak margin top and it moves. There's no surprises.
Yep.
There's other things like this too. Just, how you lay things out, how you choose. I'm trying to think, there was another example I had where just how I would go about doing this. Do you add like a div with a spacer, or do you do like a section with padding? Like you look at a design and let's say you had this is a tough one. let's say 90% of the design is container. So it's like max width 1200. And then there's part of it that goes outside of it. So like, how would an implementer think about that? You ask, people would give you different responses.
Yeah.
One, you could say like, you should have a parent wrapping the whole thing that's a container, so that if you go to add a paragraph of text, 90% of the time it's going to fill within that container. So it's good that it's already being wrapped. The times where you need to go out of it is a special case. So let's make something that lets you escape from the wrapping.
Would that be like a negative margin?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's funny, because that's exactly how I would not think of it.
So
I would say that you basically have two containers here. Your top container has a max width, and then you do a bottom container with no max width and a background color.
What if that thing is like in the middle though? What if that thing is like in the middle? Like what if it's like, it's like text, and then it's like wide, and then it's like text.
Oh, yeah. So 3 containers. Basically the fact that you're going wide.
But then if you don't have a wide one, you end up with one container.
Yeah.
But that's kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
Because conceptually, it's one section.
It makes refactoring super difficult,
right?
Because actually what would happen is if you told me to remove the wide thing,
yep.
the middle thing in the middle, I would delete it, and there'd be 2 containers.
Yeah, that both have the same max width. And then you come back and look at that, you're like, why is this apparent?
Why are there 2 containers?
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So this is the kind of stuff that's really hard. We have a panel UI component that I was playing around with one time that does this. UI panel as panel, or UI container as container, and it just boom does it. It gets the text right on mobile, tablet, desktop, so you can just like go to town with like p tags and title tags and it'll look good. But then you need to escape it, and you can do the contextual container. You can do container.fullWidth. So you have UI container, all your stuff, and you just do like a UI container.fullWidth, and then you just drop in and you can do anything you want.
So you still have one parent and then this thing.
Conceptually, you're looking at the template and it's like, this is a section. It's just that this part escapes itself.
So yeah.
Just an idea.
I actually
just an approach.
And I like this because you're not actually exposing the implementation there.
Right. Exactly.
So me as a developer, I can say, hey, how do I escape? Okay, I used p.fullWidth, container.fullWidth, whatever it is.
Exactly.
And get out. Cool.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And this is like a pain to do if you were just doing Tailwind, because if your margins change, like let's say the gutters where the padding on your container changes, and now you have to like negative margin 1, medium, negative margin 2, large, colon, negative margin 3. And if you ever change any of those, there's a relationship between those things.
So can Tailwind take like all your margins and generate a negative version of those?
You could do a component that's a container. Actually, the container that ships with Tailwind is called a Tailwind plugin. I believe it's a plugin that provides a Tailwind component. So you could do a Tailwind component that like extends. Remember the apply?
Yeah.
So you could do like container, and then you could do like container escape. And that way, at least you could like look at one file and have all the rules there. So if you change like ML2, you would do like negative ML2 and change it.
Gotcha.
So that would be like a way you could do it without Ember components. But Ember is even better, right? The API is even better because you don't have to think about it. So that would be another way to do it. But that's the kind of thing. It's like if we asked someone at Dockyard, someone at Thoughtbot, someone at Apple, someone at Netflix, given this page, implement this. This is an area, especially for the styling stuff. Mm-hmm. This is like an area no one talks about, I feel like. You can do this stuff with CSS, but that's not really what I'm getting at. It's this thing of where you need to implement a design, and of course there's a million ways to do it. Drop downs, positioning apps. I mean, there's just that conversation we just had. Thinking about margins as outside components, layout versus components differently, like all these things. I feel like this is the stuff that takes forever.
Yeah.
It takes forever.
What is do you think the answer here is like a UI toolkit?
I think it's just like education around this niche, and then like seeing how other people do it, just like we do with other things. It's like, how do we know to use like a scroll into view components just because people are talking about it and like talking about implementation, but like people are like, oh yeah, I got that working, or, even like the Laracast redesign. I was like listening to Jeffrey talk about that, and yeah, he was like fiddling around with some CSS. It's just like, It's the part of the job that you just grind your teeth and get through, and then you ship it and you're done. But it's not like I can tell you I'm going to see a layout again in the future that's going to be a fixed width thing. The gutters are going to change on small tablet and desktop, and there's going to be parts of that need to escape it. What's the right way to do that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I can tell you what I would do based on my, 5 years of building this stuff or whatever, but like I also changes every time I do it. So this is another thing. Look at Apple's website. It's very different. Like there's not really containers. Like you click the blocks and like they know their widths kind of. They have like the image. It's just not laid out as I would do it if I were to just go back. I'm sure there's great reasons why. I want to know those reasons. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. Do you think part of this, going back to what you said, like you grind on CSS, you grind your teeth on CSS, you fiddle with it, you get it working, and you're done.
Yeah.
Where when I think of like backends I design or APIs I design, there's always like I get it working, but then I always have like the next refactor in the back of my head. Now it's usually not high value or high yield, so it goes to the lower priority.
Right.
But I know.
But what if you knew those rules in this? What if you knew like, margin here, I need to pull this out of the component?
I guess that's my question is like when I fiddle with CSS and get it working, I never am thinking, I'm like, okay, I get it working, let's ship it. I'm never thinking at that, what is the next refactor?
Right. So maybe there's room for this. Also, it's just like, I feel like you're like, oh, I'm taking an Ember course. I'm taking a Vue course. I want to learn how to use Vue components. If someone's writing that course, they're just going to be doing Vue components. They're not going to be. This is like a different.
You would teach like the Ember API or the Vue API. It's learning about how components compose and interact with each other and
but why is it not this stuff too? I mean, like if this ends up being 60% of your job because you suck at it or because it's hard and no one's teaching it,
or it's where the time goes. 60% of your job.
Yeah. So it's like, maybe we could do a course on it, a series on EmberMap. Taking a layout from a popular page, Apple's homepage or something with a little bit of interactivity that would show how you'd use the Ember component APIs to make that stuff easier, but also like how you do this with CSS. Also like what we talked about last week, like fast booting things and being declarative, all that stuff feeds into this. Like it affects how you would think about this problem.
I mean, maybe the boundaries here are just so squiggly and not well defined where you have like styling and then behavior and you're often thinking about those things at the same time and that's just.
But anyone, whether you're using Vue or React or Ember, give me some front end devs who are detail oriented from Netflix, from Apple, from Facebook. Give them a UI page, just a static page, and ask how they would cut that up into their respective front end technology of choice. There's going to be enough overlap that all those people can have a conversation about how they would use components or wouldn't use components, how they would use CSS. And I think you'd learn a lot from that.
Cool.
So, I just think that this is like it's like, what's that term? It's like the big fat secret or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's like the big fat secret that no one talks about.
Like dirty little secret?
Yeah, dirty little secret.
Yeah, whatever, it works.
I was thinking of the elephant in the room.
Elephant in the room is
that's better. That's a good one. No, but I think a dirty little secret. I think it is a dirty little secret as well. It is an elephant in the room. Maybe it's both. It's a dirty little secret that cutting up a design into HTML and CSS is still super hard, regardless of how good the front end technology has become. And maybe a dirty little secret is like, I'm an experienced front end developer, and I just spent like 2.5 hours because this thing has like gutters on tablet and I need to escape it in this. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
that's like,
dude, that's me.
Yeah, I mean, that's me too. I mean, that happens. Like that happens. Yep. It's hard. It's hard stuff. So that would be interesting to like do some research and poll some people and just see how they think about it. And maybe there's some rules we can get at. For example, the margins one, which like helps you a lot in the future.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, if any listeners have any suggestions or sort of, like the margins, not putting margins in components, that's like a hard lesson that we learned. So if you know of something like that, if folks know of something like that, I'd love to hear from them.
Yep, definitely. Cool.
So another thing I've been dealing with is JSON API includes. So a lot of times when we make a GET request, the front end can just say, hey, give me the user, all their blog posts, all those blog post comments. And there's like a great little way of formatting that request, even with like our add-on like storefront, and just makes this stuff so easy to fetch that sort of data. I've noticed that when I'm posting or patching stuff to the back end, I'm patching like a single model, and the back end is going to update that model, but there might be like some attribute that changes where it also then kind of fans out and updates some other data in the database. And I don't really have a good way of saying like, hey, update this comment and then like refetch the user. Like imagine like a user had like a static.
Or let's say a post has a comments count materialized property.
Yeah. So update this comment, make it unpublished. But then when you give me the response, like also sideload, also include the post since that had an attribute that changed.
Right.
I don't really have a good way of expressing this right now with Ember Data and JSON API.
Right.
What I've been doing is I've been hard coding these includes in the back end. So when you patch a comment, it's going to respond with a post. It's going to respond with that comment and also sideload that post.
So in a single request response, because the problem is, let's say you patch a comment and then it comes back success. Ember Data Store is going to be updated with the updated comment. And your UI is going to respond because Ember Data is an identity map, single source of truth for your UI. But now your UI is in an inconsistent state, because if you think about the actual source of truth for your data in the back end, the database never existed in a state where the comment was saved and the post comment count was wrong.
Yeah. So I could do something where I save the comment and then I immediately reload the post. But there's that
intermediate
small
state
in between.
Right.
Yeah. There's a state that's not actually reflective of the real world.
Right.
And so to solve this, I've been having the backend.
So you want within a single request response to go, and then for the thing to come back. This is a great thing. We were talking about this about JSON API, is that even though you're patching a comment, if the response happens to be the updated comment, but also has the post included in it, then everything's just going to work, because that whole payload is the graph is going to be read right into the Ember Data Store, and your entire Ember app will just exist in that final state.
Yep.
It skips the intermediate state.
It's awesome. I mean, it's awesome.
It's awesome. It's just that there's no way to, there's no semantics for expressing, I want to patch this and respond with these other related resources.
Yeah.
Or respond with resources that might happen to change.
So I have some ideas here, like some things that would actually work, but okay. So I've been hard coding this stuff in the back end. So you patch the comment, you get everything back that gets read in.
And that's basically saying like the back end knows, I know best, so I'm just going to tell you what's changed.
So this works, but it's kind of like against the way we've been building UIs. We make our UIs smarter and smarter. So if you think about a GET request, when I get comments, if I need like their authors included, I specifically have to ask for them. The back end is dumb. The back end doesn't say, oh, I know best, I'm going to automatically include authors for you. The back end saying like, you're specifically not asking for authors, so I'm going to not give them to you.
So it's weird now that you're patching a comment and the back end is...
Yeah, part of me feels like a little like, oh, I'm doing something that I know I'm not, like, that I know we've been burnt by before. And,
right.
And that all of our, our 5 years of
knowledge,
SPA, has taught us that,
tells us.
Yeah, this might get you in trouble. But in the reality of sort of JSON API and our backend JSON API implementation and Ember Data, this is by far the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, if you had to do this, if you were working at a company and had to do this is what you'd do.
Yeah, I think you could do something where, like, the include is a query param that's part of the URL. So you could do something where you do a patch or post to a URL with an include query param, and then the body, like the actual post body, is a JSON document to update that resource.
Right.
So I think you could do this, but there's no like entry point. There's no way to tell Ember Data to do that. Like when I save this model, also add this include query string onto the URL. So you can imagine like passing like options
user.save and then options include, reload with, or like respond with.
Yeah. Include.
Or respond include or something like that. Yeah.
So that was one idea, but then it's like, man, I don't I feel like I'm framework fighting when I go down those roads. So
well, you could imagine it being an API that gets added to the framework.
Yes. Yeah. Like additional data to post with.
The problem here, though, is that you had another idea. I like that. The problem is still that it actually is true that the server knows best in this case. So if you,
yes,
I guess this is the part that's like,
well, no, it's true. The server does know best, because if a server is going to go off and change some other model,
yeah, now it changes the user, and you didn't even know.
How can the front end possibly know that?
Yeah. So let's go to snap our finger. Ideal world. What's the ideal world? The ideal world is actually
the ideal world is some. I'm just cutting you off all day.
Go.
The ideal world is some distributed database where like there's some other mechanism of how data is synchronized between your
I think we're saying this. I think the same thing. I was going to say ideal world is you are showing post 1 on the screen right now. So your app is subscribed to post 1. So if you patch a comment that happens to change post 1, you get the updates to post 1. And the tooling does it in such a way that it only gives you, like, it batches the payloads to avoid unnecessary states that are like impossible.
You can do like forks.
It's like a log. It's like a log.
You can do forks too. Like if I'm editing post 1, I don't want to get post 1 updates.
Right.
Because I might be editing the body. I don't want you to overwrite that.
Right.
So
let's keep it simple. You're going far ahead.
Edge cases, bro.
Let's keep it simple. So you have post 1 and comment 1 in the store. You create comment 2 on the client side, and you click save. Goes to the back end. Back end creates saves comment 2. So you have a new log entry. And then there's another thing that basically updates a materialized view thing that updates the comment count on the post. And that's another log entry?
Yeah, that would be new log entry.
Okay. Yep. So now the client could say, I only have this log entry, and now I need, you don't get all the entries because there's things that you don't care about, but somehow you can filter the log entries based on what resources you're subscribed to.
There's some browser API. It's like server sent events, but they have like an actual API for you can give an ID.
Oh, really?
Like, of the event
cool.
I got. I've never used this, so I don't know its limitations or spots you can get in trouble. But I did look at this for a way of syncing data back and forth.
And that way you would be able to. Now, how would that work? So,
well, you would have to. So the back end.
And if it's a request response cycle. Like you still need to get those two events together and send it as a single, from the perspective of the client, needs it as a single bulk update.
Yeah.
So you don't, if you're doing request response, like it has to be part of the response, or there's a separate like event that like pushes it up.
Right. And when you think about like logs, you're probably just reading the logs like one line at a time.
Yeah.
So you would see the first update.
Yeah.
And then you would see the next update. Now you could say like,
now couldn't the front end say I'm on log 1 and the latest is 3, and you need to go through everything up until 3 and only respond with the things that you're subscribed to?
Yeah, but that's tricky because a lot of times like if you're reading 3, you actually don't know how long the file is. You don't know how big that you would have to like read ahead to see what the actual size of the file. And then like, there's like you might never catch up. There could be data that's just always being written.
So what about
you're reading?
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. What about this? I think in this case, they wouldn't be 2 separate log entries because it's not actually a consistent state of the database. It would be 1 log entry that would be mutating both the comment 2 and the comment count in the post.
So that'd be interesting. Yeah,
because you can't get them both separately, and that would solve the problem.
The whole point of this is inconsistency.
Right.
So yeah. You get one.
So somehow it's the back end controller action here that's saying you're creating a post. I'm going to create 1 log entry that's a mutate of the state, and it's going to be both those resources changing.
Right. Yeah, this is interesting because we're saying we don't care if our databases are inconsistent, and that like our front end is maybe a few seconds or a few minutes behind the back end.
Right.
We're saying the problem is when the inconsistency
impossible state
is an impossible state.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. It can be stale, but it can't be impossible. Yeah, that's a bigger problem. I mean, yes. Ideally it's not stale either, but if it's impossible, that's a real big problem.
Staleness is fine.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah.
But this, I mean, okay, so going back to everything, this huge problem that we've just magically solved.
Right.
this is so hard how you like implement this and how you share all this data. And so, yeah, having the back end just figure out like, okay, yeah, I'm changing all this stuff. And so I'm going to respond with this as a body of the response to your
But
patch
that's actually
request.
closer to the ideal situation than anything else, because if we're saying the consumer should have the burden and it's like, oh, wait, I'm actually showing the post one here. I actually need to fetch it. So the other option, one of the things we talked about when this came up earlier this week was JSON API operations. So we're talking about that there's no real semantics for saying patch me comment 2 and I need to refresh these other, right? Have you ever seen, we've seen this in like lots of apps we worked on when we were new to Ember. We've seen it in consulting projects. It's just something you get into. It's like a refresh models thing where you're like, well, I just want to refresh everything because I know crap got stale. Like everything is in an inconsistent state. It's either like reload the page or it's just like reload the model hook because of whatever. So this is what we're talking about. Like this is something every Ember developer, every SPA developer, I can guarantee has like run into before. So we're talking about a better situation for that. So there's no semantics for expressing this right now with JSON API where you say patch comment 2 and then give me post 1 in the response. But if we had JSON API operations, the promise there is like you could actually send over an operation which has, you could send over a log or like a request. It's like has two operations. Yeah. One is a patch to comments 2. One is a get to post 1 include comments, and then that would solve the problem of the impossible state. It was just from the perspective of the Ember app. It's all rolled into one state change. But this still puts the knowledge on the burden on the consumer. Right. The consumer still has to know post 1 depends on comment 2. So I think that's maybe would enable some cool things and solve some problems for sure. But for this particular problem, I think actually the ideal is closer to what we already do, which is if anything changes, ideally it's only anything that changes that you care about. But if this operation changes anything else, just sideload it with a response.
Yeah, this is interesting. So when I started this, it felt weird that I was putting this knowledge in the server because normally we have the knowledge in the client. Dumb server. Yeah, but maybe this makes sense for fetching data. Dumb server, smart client. Right. But maybe you just convinced me. I mean, yeah, with
a mutation,
smart client, smart server, dumb client, because the server, at the end of the day, the server knows
what was changed. Yep. Yeah, I was thinking like the analogy here is like SQL, right? Where SQL is dumb. And if you ask for one thing, it doesn't give you another. I guess there's an analog where if you create a record, it tells you the ID because it knows best about the auto incrementing ID. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's an example where, it's just where does it make sense to have the responsibility?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's really good.
And in this case, like you basically have to solve this problem of like these two things can't exist atomically. Like they are one conceptual change of the state of your system from like A to B, and it has to include all this data. So I think didn't we talk about this one time like a year ago where I had this whole design in my brain where like the resource that's changed.
You can like look at everything that changed
as a log and then like
respond with it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it gets really tricky. Yeah. I think like, cause you're like batching up and then saying like, oh, this is since your last request, we've changed all this data in the system and here. I think it gets really tricky. I think it's buildable.
Yeah.
But
let's start now.
That's just that's doable.
Yeah. This would be awesome though. If this was like, this is the kind of thing that's like, I don't want to get back on this horse that we've beat to death. But if there was more constraints in you were doing something like an Ember and a Rails and you are using JSON API, then this is the kind of thing that could come out of the box. Yeah. Where the kind of stuff you're building for the fast boot cache, where it's a dependency, it's keys, it busts it because it knows the dependency graph. You could do all this if you were just doing like basic CRUD modeling and relationships. And you could just have this out of the box. Like it could literally work out of the box where I change something and it happens to change a derived or affected attribute on another resource, just reloads it along with it and you don't even care.
Yeah. So I want to kind of bring this back to the server responding with data.
With a graph.
Yeah, with a graph when you
just patch a comment.
I noticed this like since doing this also kind of opens a door to like new patterns to do in JSON API. So there's like this JSON API problem that I always bring up. It's like the shopping cart problem.
Mm-hmm.
You can't build a shopping cart with JSON API.
With operations.
But you can't. Today you
can't. Yeah,
you can't because, you have to create the shopping cart. You have to.
Yeah, you want to create a graph of data. You cannot create a graph of data right now.
Right. So if you're saying the server can respond with includes, this does make the shopping cart a little more approachable because you can like create a new synthetic model that just has a whole bunch of random data in it, and then the server, it's like
but the server but the client has 2 items that are unsaved. How do you get both of those over the same way in the same payload?
So you do a post. The client does a post, and the client comes up with like some other API where it's like
a cart that has many items or something like that.
Yeah. So it does a post to cart,
but you can't post you can't post relationships.
Yeah, you can hack
post
it.
Keys.
So what if you did this? What if you post?
Yeah, hack it like attributes, like Rails does it. Like Rails does it.
Yeah,
when Rails serializes a form with nested models.
Exactly. So you have an attribute on your model called items, and it's an array of like pojos. With items, and I mean, you're probably cringing hearing this, but you can imagine this, and then the actual backend now says, okay, great, I created your shopping cart, and then here's like the actual models that got created that are included.
But that's hacking around JSON API.
Yes.
What we're talking about is not.
It's not hacking around JSON API.
It's part of JSON API, and it actually is conceptually, semantically makes sense from my perspective. I could argue that. Yeah, it's completely. You send a patch, and I send back a JSON API doc. What's the requirements from the specs perspective on what's the response for a mutation? I think it's just a JSON API document. If it happens to sideload things, it's still spec compliant.
Yep.
So to me, that's totally fine. We just need better APIs to actually do that. For the shopping cart case, we need the operations, but that actually solves the problem in a way that's not hacky. You don't have like posts as an array of pojos. You need operations for the shopping cart.
Sure.
But that's like a good solution for it.
But we don't have operations.
But we don't have all the stuff you're talking about either. I'm just
No, but we could. But I'm saying we could post to like a synthetic model.
You're saying
that
something.
Exist.
You're saying it's not actually a violation because it's not that you're adding a fake attribute to the shopping cart that's like items. It's just that you actually have a thing that's like an items property that has like an array of pojos or something like that. But if they added that, it would be bad.
Shopping cart is a bad example.
It's a great example.
No, but let's come up with one that's a good example for what I'm saying. So it's something like you're creating a new sign up. Mm-hmm. And your sign up has like
create a team or something.
Yeah, you create a user, you create a team, and you create You create a purchase. And so imagine you had like a sign up model, and the sign up model had like an attribute of email, an attribute of team name, and an attribute of like credit card number.
And it happens to create. Yes, that is a better example. I see what you're saying.
So you
now.
Post that, and then you get back a document that's like, okay, I created your sign up. I also created these.
Right.
The sign up also has a relationship to a user, a team, and all this stuff.
And maybe you actually want the sign up in your system. You actually want it modeled because you want to create it at and all this stuff.
Yeah. The funny thing here,
if you're doing that to get around the problem that would be solved with operations, like if you actually just want a user, a team, and a purchase created, and you don't need any other model that's related to them, and you would be able to do it. I would argue if snap my fingers, if JSON API operations existed, that would be the right way to do it.
But it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't right now.
I think
conceptually it is the correct.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
But I also think there's this class of problems that you're talking about, which 100%, if you're creating something, so you're respond with a graph.
You're posting to a sign up. You actually don't care about the sign up. You care about the models that get created.
Right.
So get response with a graph of like an actual user model, an actual team model.
Right.
An actual subscription model.
Right.
And then you get those in the store. And then even though you have your
Ember app is never in the state. It's never in a bad state.
Yes.
It doesn't exist in the server, which is
because you're able to create multiple models in one request by using attributes of a single model to represent multiple models.
That's right. But the goal is it's because your server is doing all this in a transaction. It's all in or all not. Yeah. It's like all these 3 models are existing in my database or they're not. That way, when you write computed properties in Ember that are like a user is signed in if they have a team, but like there's a spot where you have a user but no team, but then the second request that comes, you avoid all that stuff, which is like the goal. So
yes, yeah,
I totally agree with that. It's just it's another instance of the general problem of this mutation that you've posted, that you've told me about, that you've requested. Has affected other resources. Here's all the affected resources for the mutation.
Transaction is a really good word.
Delete
if
as well.
there's some
Yeah,
way
transaction.
if there's some
Operations.
way to, yeah,
Operations.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know, but I do not like, oh, just use
Operations.
JSON API operations because I can't.
Yeah. Also, there is something higher level here because of the case of the signup, where you're not just creating the signup model just to accommodate this problem, just to work around this, but you're creating it because it's actually a model in your system. You want signups.
But what if I don't? Like, let's just say like I don't.
Well, if you don't, it's operations.
Yeah. Yes.
But it's totally valid to want it. Let's say you have this model where you have a sign up and it points to a user and it points to a team and it points to purchase, and you want to create all of them in a transaction. I guess, would you create, maybe you would do operations.
Yeah, I think I would. I think I would do operations because you probably don't have a sign up that points directly to a user, a team, and
you know what's weird about this is like, I feel like we're getting into a discussion, but it's interesting to me to think about this. There's going to be some order dependency on these models. In the back end, you're going to like first create the user, and if it fails, blah blah, you exit. Otherwise, you'll create the team. If it fails, exit, blah blah. Otherwise, create the sign up, and now it all works.
To pull a play from your book, I think JSON API operations supports this.
No, but does that mean both the front end and the back end has to know that? Or would you just want the front end to send the minimal data? I've got an email, I've got a team name, and I've got a plan that they're purchasing. And in that case, I actually don't want to do operations because that forces knowledge on the client to say, I actually know I need to create the user first and then this and then this. Whereas really, I'm just from the perspective of the client, you're creating a sign up.
I see what you're saying. So like
what if you have to change that order in the back end and now you have to change it? And that seems horrible.
Yeah, good.
So it seems like you actually would want to just
sign up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because the user's like, that's what they're doing.
So when you have a sign up,
so this is a valid use case for creating a thing and having it come back with a graph, and not using operations to solve that.
But the sign up works nice when you have just string attributes. But like when I was kind of pitching this as a shopping cart, it falls apart.
I was just thinking about that.
I'm saying like do Pojos.
There's a lot of stuff here, and you're like,
what if maybe
it's interesting?
Okay.
It's like, if you're persisting the data in the back end in a transaction, if you happen to, let's say you have a UI that's like doing 10 things and one of them can fail, but the other 9 should go through. In that case, like you do them a separate request or something like that.
Yes.
Shopping cart, like you do them together.
I think it's okay that the client knows about order. It's like,
but also whether you're doing things as a transaction or not. Well, I guess it's just,
I think if it's in an operation, it's in a transaction. At least that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we can look at like the spec.
Maybe that is it. So
that's what I would assume.
This is weird though, because to me, like the sign up, maybe there's ways to link the resources on the client with GUIDs, like with GUID IDs. And then they get replaced by the server.
I'm getting really excited, but yes, I think you can do that.
So you're creating a graph of objects in both cases. And so you shouldn't do something like create a sign up with like artificial, like synthetic attributes. Like in both cases, you're just an operation. It's an operation. It's a list of operations that are like creating a graph. I guess that's the question. How does JSON API operations prescribe that you create a graph of related data? Is it that you create the first one, the second one, and the third one? Is it that you link them all and then you just can give me a graph of things that have keys to each other via GUIDs, and then I can do that for you? I mean, that would be pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what the answer is.
I think the later one you just explained, the graph with keys that link.
Yeah.
I've heard this concept called side posting. I
think
it's like the
side
hack
posting.
that some people use to get around this, but that's what they do.
Interesting.
Seems hard.
Seems like it would also be extremely useful. Well, What we've done on like our admin page where you like reorder something is like you just say, oh, I happen to be patching in one tick of the run loop. I think we should do a series on this too, because this is actually solving a real world problem that developers face today. You are patching the position of like 10 sortable items at once. And
so you move item 1 item 10 to 1. And so you're
2
like
through 8, 9 have to be bumped up.
So you can imagine there's 10 different patch requests that go on here.
And what if one fails? Yeah, it's just not. It's not.
Yeah,
it's not what you're thinking. This is one thing from the perspective of both the user and even the server is doing this as one thing, or like it's just reordering things as one conceptual thing. So you want some way to express that. It's hard, but I think it's actually not that hard. It's actually what is it? Is it like it's not? It's simple, but it's not.
It's easy, but it's not simple.
Yeah. It is easy. It's very you just need a transaction, but it's just you have to actually. Someone has to do the work. If anyone's motivated, you have my phone number. Cool. I think that would be a good series. I've been starting to think about this as like a series we should do where it's like, it's tempting when you think about like tutorials and it's like, here's how to use a component in Ember, whatever it is. But it's like, okay, I'm like, 6 feet into this ditch and I need some help here. Like, let's do something real.
Yep.
What's the, I was thinking draftable. Draftable should be a series because it's just like how we would solve the problem today. The reordering thing with a run loop.
Reordering thing with a run loop would be, and that's something that you've done before.
Yep.
And it's super elegant.
Yep.
Looks great. Draftable is funny because like you think like, oh, I want to make draftable as a series. And the next slide is like, oh, I want to make a draftable add-on. And then
that's happening already with this nested drop-down series we just started. I'm like, wait, I shouldn't be teaching anyone this. I should just make an add-on. No one should have to think about this ever again. But part of this is like, you're going to run into new problems that are similar, and this is how we would think about it. But 100%, all of these things should be add-ons.
You're like, I don't want the same with the forms, right?
Yeah.
I don't want people just copying the forms that I'm writing into their app,
right?
And then not like every app is going to have different levels of form abstraction. So if you just copy mine, you need to copy mine, but then understand what you should have inside the form and outside the form.
Right.
And so if you just copy mine and not think about that,
right,
you're going to have a bad time.
Which is why you want to lock them in with a small public API via an add-on.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to teach the concepts.
Yes.
And then I want to say at the end,
use the add-on.
Use this add-on.
Yeah.
And small public API. And this is, your app should create its own API on top of that. But
it's a lot of work.
All of a sudden a series goes from one video a week to 18
years of maintenance.
Yeah.
Cool. Should we wrap it?
Yeah, I think so.
Last week we mentioned this. What was the law that you mentioned? We were talking about communication structures.
I mentioned Metcalfe's law. But it's not Metcalfe's law. It's Conway's law.
We were looking at the links and it's called Conway's law. And this, do you know how it's stated? Let me just delay while I pull this up.
I mean, since I got it right last week, I might as well try to get it right again.
Yeah.
I think
Let's see how you do.
I think Conway's law is your services will mimic your organization's communication structure.
Pretty good. Conway's law is an adage. Adage?
Yeah, adage, sure.
Named after computer programmer Melvin Conway, who introduced the idea in 1967. It states that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. So yeah.
It's also, you have a few jobs programming and it's painfully true. It's so true.
What do you mean?
Just like the couple of jobs of programming that I've had, it's
the
services that we build are like, oh yeah, that does kind of act how people talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Teams like get along really well, like different teams, but they get along really well. Tend to have a bunch of custom API, just a custom like, oh yeah, I'll add that for you. I'll do this for you. Like a whole bunch of just the client, like one server is just fetching data from the other server, the custom endpoint. And it's funny. It's like, well, it does work.
Yeah.
And it works great. And it works because the teams they get along and it's easy for them to add attributes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll be back next week as always. We're trying to publish these every week, Wednesday mornings. So we're trying to be consistent there. And who knows what we're going to be talking about next week.
JSON API. Hey, we didn't talk about fast food this week.
CSS. That's true. Yeah, you're the reigning fast food expert now, practitioner. Did you do any fast food work this week? We'll find out next week.
We're not talking about fast food this week.
All right. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.